Namaste. Good morning. Dear Dr. Sonali Gupta, today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Geetesh Nirban, co-convener of the webinar, distinguished invitees, dear friends who are interested in Mahabharata scholarship, I welcome you all to the 28th session of this series of webinars on Mahabharata as hosted by Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. These webinars are being organized under the aegis of SPARK project, which is a scheme for promotion of academic and research collaboration, an initiative of Ministry of Education, Government of India. The title of the project that we have taken up is Yoga Consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, an ethical value for societal and political well-being. We are working as a team along with Professor Vishwa Adluri from Hunter College as the principal investigator from international collaboration, and Dr. Joydeep Bachi, who is presently associated with the Hindu University of America as a co-principal investigator from the international side, and Dr. Geetesh Nirban from Department of Philosophy, Kamala Nehru College, as the Indian co-investigator, and me, Professor Bala, head of the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, as a principal investigator from the Indian counterpart. Our extended team includes Ms. Jayashree Jha, Ms. Anmol Preet Kaur, and Ms. Megha Kapoor, who are our research scholars in the Department of Philosophy at Delhi University, and Ms. Deepshika, who is a postgraduate student in the department. As far as our project is concerned, it is our collaborative attempt to revisit the Indian epic to explore yoga consciousness as one of its underlying messages, while understanding how dharma, as a result of yoga consciousness in Mahabharata, can well be interpreted for political and societal well-being. This is what we are planning. We have been trying to continuously do, and one of the important aims of this project is to build a new approach to yoga that combines theoretical and practical perspectives. And we are also in the process trying to reappropriate the texts of classical Hinduism, which have suffered from Orientalist approaches, in order to articulate the vision of yoga consciousness. And one of the primary focus of this project is to demonstrate how answers to the question of right action at societal and political levels can be explored through the conception of yoga consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita that transcend the sectarian and doctrinal boundaries to create a global system of thought and practice. And with this purpose, we have started this series of webinars during the
what happened?
I don't know.
We can wait for a while. We'll wait for Dr. Bala to join.
Yeah. It must be the internet or the power.
Yes, there are sometimes the connectivity issues.
Yeah. I like your library, Dr. Gitesh.
Thank you. That's what is our life, no?
Yes.
Got nothing else.
I've got books all around me, but not behind me right now. I've got the window. So you can see the Peer Panjal range right from where I am sitting.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just make one phone call to Dr. Bala and we'll restart.
Yeah.
Sorry for a mild interruption. Dr. Bala will just join in a few minutes. There he is. Yes, Dr. Bala.
Yeah, good morning. In fact, when we were having an informal chat, Dr. Sonali has said this may happen to her, but it happened to me. I lost the connectivity suddenly. Yeah. What I was trying to say is in this extreme time of lockdown, we have began this webinar and it has been going on very well with the support of our participants. And we were fortunate to invite very distinguished scholars on this platform, and we had deliberations on various aspects of related to Mahabharata and philosophy and yoga consciousness. And we are today very fortunate to have Dr. Sonali Gupta, who is the director of Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies at Kulu, Himachal. She will be speaking to us on from the lens of anthropological archaeology, Mahabharata, the present past in the Western Himalayas. In fact, though we had touched various other aspects of Mahabharata, we haven't touched this anthropological archaeology into the text. So this approach to the text is going to be something that is going to fascinate all of us. And when we look at this text Mahabharata, how do we look at it? Is it only a text which belongs to the past? Is it just a myth? Or because the historical, as per the conceptual lens of the Western theoreticians, it doesn't qualify to be a historical happening. So if that is the case, as they call it a myth, so does it have only such kind of relevance, or how do we look at it? How do we understand it is very important. And is it only in the past, or is it only in the present? Because some people argue that it is not in the past. Okay, Mahabharata is not a text of the past which has an archaic relevance, but it is a text of the present in the sense that it is there in each one of us, and it is continuously getting lived and relived by people of the country. So that is how, is it only in the past or is it only in the present? And Dr. Sonali is wonderfully saying it is present past, right? So how do we understand this present past? No? When we look at present past, there are two things that came to my mind when I was looking at this title. Like one, present past can be lived past, which is only there in you as a memory. And the other present past could be our living past. Okay. So which is, as we have been discussing again and again about this performing traditions, they are living past. Okay. People live them, and while performing, they live the past, and that is the second kind of present past that we can look at or conceptualize when we try to look at this concept present past. And sometimes this living past is a burden, especially when it is only a memory. Sometimes it becomes a burden, and sometimes it is a liberating force. Sometimes this living past or the present past is a liberating force. It works really well for the individuals to come out of the whatever complications or concerns that with which they suffer in the world. It works as a liberating force. But especially when we look at it from the Indian tradition, perspective of the Indian tradition, it is always a part of the knowledge system itself. Okay. For instance, we call them smritis. So what is a smriti? Smriti, we accept smriti to be one of the crucial aspects of epistemology, Pramana Shastra. All the Pramanas require smriti at some point or the other, and also smriti texts are considered to be part of our knowledge system. And that is how the present past has a very significant place in the Indian tradition. I'm sure we are going to gain much insights into this, the present past of Mahabharata through the lens of anthropological archaeology from Dr. Sonali. Without wasting much time, I request Dr. Geetesh to introduce Dr. Sonali formally and take the proceedings further. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bala. Namaskar and good morning to all. So here we are back again on a Saturday morning, and we have, as Dr. Bala said, Dr. Sonali Gupta with us. She's the director of Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies, which is situated at a very beautiful place called Katran in Kulu region of Himachal Pradesh, India. She earned her PhD in 2015 from University of California, Los Angeles, wherein the title of her dissertation has been Understanding Transmission of Skill as Influencing Continuity or Change Through Locally Manufactured Utilitarian Wear at Greco-Roman Cairns. She's an alumni of Faculty of Law, University of Delhi, Department of History, University of Delhi, Hansraj College, University of Delhi, and National Museum Institute of History of Art Conservation and Museology, New Delhi. As far as her teaching and academic experience is concerned, she's the founding director of the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies. That's what we have talked about. She has been a postdoctoral fellow working on Iban textiles of Borneo, their myths and transmission, a study from 2018 to 2019. She's been the director of the very project that she's very fascinated about, Himalayan Myth and Reality. The project based in Kulu Valley, Himachal Pradesh in 2018. She's the director of programs, UCLA, Kotson Institute of Archaeology. She's been a lecturer of anthropology at UCLA from 2016 to 2019, being a founder member or being the founder of Ethno-Archaeological Research Group, UCLA. She's been a visiting professor at National Museum Institute of History of Art, Conservation and Museology in New Delhi in 2015. Dr. Gupta has a rich archaeological experience with many projects on national and international levels. And the most recent one that I can talk about, which is so close to my own heart, is India ethno-archaeological and anthropological fieldwork on myth and reality in Kulu, Malana, and Spiti Valley, Himachal Pradesh, India in 2018. She's worked on projects related to her specialized study in archaeology in India and Egypt, with many publications, fellowships, awards, and grants to her credit, which I think the time won't allow me to read out the long list that we have here. And I would like to say that she's a very active social media personality who's a Himalayan enthusiast running an Himalayan institute. And now she's dedicated her life to the study and promotion of Himalayas, its people, places, culture, performances, tradition, and philosophy. We're very honored and privileged to have you amongst us, Dr. Sonali. And today, Dr. Sonali Gupta is going to be delivering an address on from the lens of anthropological archaeology, Mahabharata, the present, and the past in the Western Himalayas. Over to you, Dr. Sonali.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gitesh, for giving me that wonderful introduction. And of course, as we evolve as academicians, these things just come our way. We just dive deep into it and immerse. And immersion is all that we do, all of us, in whatever we do. And I'm so happy that Dr. Bala actually touched upon certain things that I will be talking about. Prime amongst them is the whole idea of myth, and how when we actually, with the lens of the Western lens that we have been given, even in translations and everything of our epics, we see things from their point of view. And now as India is growing, it became independent, we have our scholars who are kind of shedding light, with personalities as you, who are looking at our texts from closer quarters and adding that much needed dimension of Indianness and belongingness that we all have to our text, to our heritage, and we as a people. And with that, I bring my own perspective, which is not individually my own. The whole idea of corroborating a literary source with archaeological evidence started much earlier in the 1940s, in the 1950s, perhaps inspired by what was happening in the West. For example, the whole legends that we see in the epics of the Iliad and the Odyssey with Helen of Troy and Heinrich Schliemann, and how he kind of excavated and never found Troy. And later, archaeologists did find Troy 7, who was Helen of Troy. And, that whole myth kind of came to life. And here we are also searching for that somewhere, that these stories that we've grown up with, somewhere they fascinate us so much. They're so fantastical. They're so out of this world that we remember them, that they have become our consciousness. And of course, we all want to delve into that mystery. And I will be talking about all of that. I have been trained as an Egyptian archaeologist, but my main theme of study has been cultural transmission. So that allows me to transplant myself transplant and transport from Egypt to the Himalayas. And when people ask me, you specialized, you did your PhD in Egyptian archaeology, I always say, I was parched enough to leave Egypt and come to the mighty Himalayas that has my soul. And here I am for the past 3 years trying to understand the Himalayas from the perspective of myth or reality. Now, when I say myth or reality, I do not mean that I'm trying to prove that myths are a reality, but there's a certain approach attached to it which helps us understand the past and present times. And this is what I'll be talking about today. So I will share my screen. Is it shared already? It says one participant can share at a time. So,
We'll just
yeah.
make it possible. Jayashree, can you please? Are you able to do it now?
I'm clicking on it, but I cannot see that. Okay, now I can. Great. So, from the lens of anthropological archaeology, Mahabharata in the Western Himalayas. Now, my core area is the Kulu Valley because this is where I am. And slowly and steadily, as the grants come in, as our project expands, and as other scholars, as you join us, I think we will be able to have a better vision of the epics in the Himalayas. So, taking from where Dr. Bala left us with mythology, what is a myth? How is a myth? Why is it myth important? How do you scrutinize a myth? And I'm going to briefly touch upon these aspects for those of you who are not versed with myths, those who are new entrants in the field of mythologies. So there are problems of defining myths. The meaning of myth comes from mythos, tale or story, a myth, a saga, a legend, and folk tale. We have to differentiate between all these kind of definitions. A myth is concerned with gods and relation with mortals, a story based on tradition or legend, which has a symbolic meaning. It conveys a certain truth to those who tell and hear it, and it need not necessarily record a true event, or maybe it does. Some myths are accounts of actual events which are transformed by symbolic meaning and shifted in time and space. Myths explain a universal, they have local beginnings, and perhaps involve supernatural beings. The great power of meaning of stories to the culture in which they developed, and a major reason why they survive as long as they do, sometimes for thousands of years. Now, for me personally, a myth is something that is codifying an event that has happened with a lot of hearsay elements. In law, we always talk about hearsay, corroborating the truth in front of a judge, and you have to have the evidence and you have to have that hearsay to show that this actually happened, that this crime actually took place. So, looking at the Mahabharata from that kind of perspective is important because, as an archaeologist, we look for evidence. So, a myth is there, and then you have the evidence, and then you're kind of corroborating, right? Then you have sagas or legends containing a little historical truth, focusing on adventures of a hero, a semi true story passed on from generation to generation, important meaning, symbolism for the culture in which it originates. It has an element of truth based on historic facts with mythical qualities, heroic characters of fantastical places encompassing spiritual beliefs of the culture in which they originate, and a folk tale, magical, fantastic, popular story passed down again, unknown author, and many versions of that tale. It comprises fables, fairy tales, old legends, and even urban legends. Some tales based on a partial truth that has been lost or hidden over time, and it is difficult to categorize folk tales precisely because they fit into so many categories. And of course, you have rationalism, metaphor, and allegory. So you have euhemerism, a rationalization of myth attributed to the Greek Euhemerus, who propounded this kind of theory in 300 BCE. Then, of course, allegory, a sustained metaphor, allegorical nature myths, explanations of meteorological and cosmological phenomenon. And I'm sure you, being, from the realm of philosophy, you must be well acquainted with this. Then you have myth and psychology. You have Sigmund Freud with his Oedipus complex, Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannos, Electra complex. You have Carl Jung with his collective unconscious and the archetypes. Myth and society, myth and ritual as espoused in the Golden Bough, a major anthropological work by Fraser. Then you have myths as social charters with Bronislaw Malinowski, where he worked on the Trobriand Islanders, where he said myths as charters of social customs and beliefs. Now, when you look at the scale, when you look at a factual historical account, a legendary occurrence, and the myth or a folktale based on culture, as you go towards the left of the spectrum, the facts are paramount. As you go towards the myth, the meaning becomes paramount. So you have to keep this in mind, that myths are not truly things that have really happened, but maybe there's so much of meaning entrenched in them that you have to take out that symbolism and try to understand it from that perspective as well. So what are the functions of the myth? Plots of the myth, places relating to myths, analysis of the myth, and what do myths have to say about humanity and its relationship with the gods? Okay. And I'll come to this at the very end of the lecture. And there's a reason why I'm elucidating this here. So we come to the Mahabharata. Peter Brook's Mahabharata was very famous. And of course, Ramesh Sippy's Mahabharata confined us all to our television sets on that Sunday 10 a.m., where the streets were deserted just like a cricket match. So the Mahabharata really plays out in the consciousness of the Indian people. And I was one of them watching the Mahabharata, my opportunity to not at that time read the text, but see the text as it was playing out as a dramatical, series, thanks to our television. And of course, the Mahabharata goes way beyond the confines of India, Southeast Asia, East Asia. You have the depiction at Angkor Wat, thanks to the Archaeological Survey of India, who helped in conserving a part of the Angkor Wat and the Angkor Tham temples. Now, the epic, as you all know, is based upon oral tradition, and it grew its present form when it was finally written down between 400 BCE to 400 CE. Here in the Kulu Valley, we have River Beas from the person who dictated the Mahabharata, Vyas, the sage Vyas. And of course, the earlier name of Beas was something else. It was not Beas, it was changed later. I'm not going to read the text, just a little bit about it. So it says, Kurukshetra's plain is strewn with the corpses of the kings. The ground is rugged with heaps of elephants' corpses like huge boulders. On every side are vultures' nests. The ground soaked with blood of horses, men, and elephants wounded and slain. There's a confused mass of torn mail, skins, umbrellas, chauris, javelins, arrows, spears, armor mixed with headless trunks, and a little of every sort of weapon. Now, as an archaeologist, when we look at this text and we excavate, do we find what is exactly written? No, because a lot of the epic was overlaid with stories added onto it, with exaggeration and all of that. So there is no one-to-one correlation between the text and the archaeological evidence. When we look at time, cause and effect, and under the Indian context, the yugas, where you have the dharma, karma, moksha, and rebirth, a never-ending constant, and the Satyug, Dwapar Yug, Treta Kal Yug, and Vishnu sitting on the Sheshnag controlling time. We cannot understand time when we talk about things from our perspective. this kind of time was according to the Indian concept of time, the ancient Indian concept of time. Uh, the Shastras, Shruti, what is heard, and Smriti, what is remembered. Uh, Dr. Bala briefly talked about Smritis. And why is it important? Because in the Smritis, we find mention of the word Itihas. So it happened. It was an event that was contemporary with something. Puranas talk about the remote past. So when we talk about the Mahabharata and we say it's a myth, it never happened, we have to understand that the ancients made a distinction. They covered Mahabharata under Itihas, that it happened, so it happened. So because it is written that way, it becomes our duty and task to investigate. Did it really happen? What is the story? Why are there so many place names around which echo of places associated with the Mahabharata? For me, the Kulu Valley is very fascinating because a lot of characters in the Mahabharata are present here. Why? Why is it that way? Dating the epic is a little problematic because there are so many opinions. One opinion says 3100 BCE, another one says 1500 BCE, 8th to 9th century BCE, and another one 4th century BCE. So we're going to investigate this a little bit. So when we talk about the Itihas and the Puranas, we are trying to understand it as a true historical event, a historical narrative. If we investigate it according to astronomy, we find that 3102 BCE perhaps is when the Kurukshetra war happened. When we look at archaeology, we find, and I'll go into detail when I talk about the painted grayware culture from 1000 BCE to 400 BCE. And I'll go through it in the next slide. When we look at Itihas and the Puranas from the genealogical point of view, and we study the Vedas, we see that the king of the Kuru dynasty and Parikshit and Janamjay were historical personals. When we look at genealogical lists, we see that in the Puranas, there's a gap between Parikshit's birth and King Nanda's throning, 382 BCE, minus 1050 years. So the war and the birth brings us to 1400 BCE. And then the myth. Now, here we are with the core of the Mahabharata here being played out at the Battle of Kurukshetra. The war difficult to date, as I said. So the first option again, the war took place around 3106 BCE during the Indus Valley civilization. Or the second option, about 1500 BCE, where we see the use of horse and chariot and war elephants and the use of iron, 1500 BCE, and the third is 900 BCE. Now, the stage for the Mahabharata is set on the plains on what is now the state of Haryana in North India in the Kurukshetra district. Here it is, right here. And you will also see that Himachal and Uttaranchal are very much near this area, near the foothills. And I'll elaborate on this a little later. Here's the Brahmasarovar, one of the part of the pilgrimage landscape. When my father died, I was told to go to Kurukshetra to do the last rite. And then they just said, oh, I needn't go there. I'll just do it in Haridwar. And I just did just that. Some sites are linked to the Mahabharata's battle, Bhishma Kund, Bhishma's cremation place, and Asthipura, the bone town. And here is the entrance, the Gita Dwar, with Arjuna's battle chariot. Now, the Saraswati River, which figures in the Mahabharata, is a small river today. If you go on the highway, you can actually see a place where they point to the Saraswati River. Now, around Kurukshetra, you have something called the painted grayware, PGW culture. The sites are Raja Karan Ka Tilla, Asthipura, Bhor Sedan, Bhagpura, Daulatpur. Now, this is all related to the later Vedic culture as well. This is what painted grayware culture looks like. When we call this a culture, it means that that particular kind of ceramic style is so defined that it can be called a culture, a whole layer of figures in different parts of the area. we find painted gray ware culture coming after ochre-colored pottery. Now, in archaeology, we define cultures according to the period in which they occur and their stylistic and technological similarities. Ochre-colored pottery, after that, there is a gap, and then you see painted gray ware culture. What is painted gray ware culture, and why am I talking about it? So when I talk about from myth to reality, now remember, we are looking at epics. Now, Dr. B.B. Lal from the Archaeological Survey of India, in the 1950s, he kind of dedicated his study towards corroborating literary sources with archaeological evidence. Earlier, Dr. B.B. Ghosh, not Dr. Dr. Ghosh, Dr. B.B. Lal and Dr. Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh also kind of found painted gray ware culture, and he talked a little bit about this. Now, when you're excavating, you're going down in time. So you're looking at space and you're looking at time. So horizontal excavation is important to understand a particular period, and the vertical excavation is to know the different time periods. So you have the natural soil, and then, like I said, the ochre-colored pottery, which was pre-1200 BCE, and then you go up to the painted gray ware culture, and then after that you have the Mahajanapadas, the northern black polished ware occurring all over, where you see the 16 Mahajanapadas. Then you have the early historic period, and then, of course, the early medieval period, the Sultanate period. And when you excavate, you're kind of looking at all of this. So you have natural clay, ochre-colored pottery, painted gray ware, and so on and so forth. So, and I talked about the Saraswati River. People used to think it's mythical, but it's not. We have NASA images which talks about, which gives proof that the Saraswati River actually dried up. So here we have the Purana Killa in Delhi, Old Fort. It's a mound. So whenever archaeological excavations take place, we have to kind of look at the terrain. Is it a natural mound, or is it a mound that you feel has been made up because of continuous inhabitation? Here in the Old Fort, which was built by Sher Shah Suri, this area was called Indraprasth. We know this because according to the revenue records, there was a village inside which was known as Indrapat. Okay, so you have other areas around Delhi, Bagpat, Tilpat. So Pat is almost like a mound, the meaning of a mound. So excavations happened here in 1964, and more recently, about 6-7 years ago, where Dr. B.B. Lal earlier tried to understand the the layering in time. And a lot of things were excavated. You see these terracotta things, little toys, bricks and ring wells and stuff like that. But were they bows and arrowheads or something like that? No, not really. But the one thing that we find were, I'll go back, the painted gray ware kind of pottery. Now, this becomes significant, and I will go through why painted gray ware becomes significant when we talk about the Mahabharata. So, one, the Saraswati was an important river. It was not mythical. In the towns along the river, Harappan ware and late painted gray ware was made. Okay, we have found sites that give evidence of this. At some time, a war took place between two branches of the Bharata family. Did the war take place at the scale as we know? That really can't be said because we do not have that kind of evidence. The war was remembered in the epic Mahabharata, which went on to become mythologically, like went and became famous through mythological proportions. The river Saraswati shrunk, it was deprived of glacial waters from the Himalayas, and the towns along it lost their importance. Now, it is important, and I'll come to why I feel that the Iron Age is very important in the Himalayas as well, because between 1100 and 700 BCE, we find the use of iron. We find the so-called Aryans using iron, using chariots, using the wheel. We have a mention of the Great Flood in the Mahabharata, and we do find evidence of the Great Flood in period 2 in Hastinapur. Okay, so there's a big layer which is a flood layer, and you can find that in archaeological excavations. Now we say that from Hastinapur, the capital went to Kaushambi. When we excavate Kaushambi, we find that the painted gray ware culture comes, after the flood. There's an alluvial plain. So that kind of corroborates the migration theory that the people migrated from Hastinapur to Kaushambi. It coincides with the later Vedic culture. We see a preponderance of later Vedic gods mentioned in the Mahabharata. Okay, not the early Vedic gods as much. There are some migration theories which are based on stylistic and technological similarities, talking about migration from Iran. Also, similarities with Faiz Muhammad pottery, as told to me by one student, Disha Aluwalia, who's doing her PhD currently. Faiz Muhammad pottery comes from Pakistan. And of course, nothing else remains of the once glorious days of the PGW culture. This was reason enough to keep the story alive, because it kind of brings down, the basic problems of humans as we face them day in and day out. And there's a popular saying, oh, Mahabharata occurs in every family, right? So it was finally written down in its version in 400 BCE. Now, the Kulu Valley. A lot has been done in the plains, and I had to mention all of this because a lot of work has gone into it. But I feel that in Himachal, not there hasn't been focus on the Mahabharata, but it lives on in the memory of the people. And the question is why? Why is everything in Kulu Valley built by the Pandavas? If you go to any temple, they will say, oh, this was built by the Pandavas. It happened overnight. They had to finish building it before the break of dawn. And this is what it is. So every temple, has been built by the Pandavas. So this is the Kulu Valley. This is the broadest part of the Kulu Valley. That is the Pir Panjal range. And on the other side is the Dhauladhar range. This is a map taken from Penelope Shetwood's famous book, Kulanthapit, End of the Habitable World. I love this map because as you go along the Bias River, you kind of see the characters and their temples emerging, on these various mountaintops on both sides of the valley. This is another view. The famous deodar trees, only used for the abode of the gods or for those who are rich enough to be able to buy the deodar trees for their homes. The tree is really fragrant, no insects come on it, and what is best for the gods is the best tree that is available. And this is another view of the Bias River cutting across the valley. The people of Kullu are very, very wise. They may be illiterate, but they have, decades of wisdom transmitted from generation to generation. And the stories they tell, and of course, the Pandavas are one of the stories they tell their children. And motifs that you see in the material culture, echo of a past. When you look at temples, ancient temples belonging to the 9th and the 11th century, you find a lot of motifs occurring, even today in their shawls, in their caps. This is another view. This kind of cruciform kind of motif. My students and I discovered that there's an ancient temple here dedicated to Shiva, also built according to the people by the Pandavas. The floor plan is actually the motif that occurs in the shawls and the caps. This is another view of the same man with his flock of sheep. And of course, the traditional pattu, which they wear, they weave it as well. And an old lady with that traditional garment. And dancers, playing out oral myths and all in their dance forms. And now I'll get to the history of Kullu. Now, after the Vedas, we see that these areas, the foothills and Himalayas proper, were occupied by the three Garthas, which find mention in the the area where they ruled were the Jalandhar Plains, which was a part of the Kulu. In Panini's Ashtadhyayi of the 5th century, he calls them, the three Gartas, as a martial republic. You find mention of the Kuluta people being Kullu. You find mention of the Odambaras, who were Shiva worshippers in the Kangra region, and the Kunindas, the mountaineers, who were perhaps descendants of the Kanates. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the Kanates in the next slide. The Kanates today, they occupy places in Sirmaur. They are not present in Kulu anymore. Now, were these people the Aborigine people of the Himalayas, the original inhabitants of the Himalayas, the Kunindas or their descendants, the Kanates, the Kashas, the Kols, the Kirats? Were they the Malana people, maybe coming from Nepal? Because there is a festival that happens here, the Kahika festival, that echoes of a past that comes from Nepal, where, the Kumari Puja is kind of converted into the marriage of the Nar with the gods, and he dies and then he's resurrected. So there's a lot of kind of um, uh, s- symbolic association with Nepal as well. So maybe the Kirats were originally from Nepal, and then you've got the Kinnars or people from Kinnor. Now, in the classical period, we have those literary sources which give us socio-cultural evidence. So you have this verse from the Mahabharata, that Tareva Sahita Savanen Ranu Rajya Chatan Ripan Ulluka Vasinha Rajan Brihantamu Sorry for my pronunciation. I guess it would have been better if I had written it in Hindi. I would have been able to pronounce it properly. So, what it says is that is thereafter, having gratified those kings with all of them, made an attack on Brihant, the native of Uluk. Reference to the people of Uluk country, Kulut, occurs in the Brihat Samhita and the Mudra Rakshas also. Kulut is mentioned as a confederate of the Malecha Panchagan Sangha, tribal. In the Mahabharata, there's mention of the Giri, Himvant, Prishishthe, Mujavat, Nama, Parvat. So the Vedic Mujavat, with herbs having qualities of the Vedic Soma, it seems occurred at Somsi, or a place called Shamsi, about 1 hour from where I am. Majahat, the hill atop Shamsi, is known as Majhat, which is pointing to Kullu. And in the Atharva Veda also, you find mention of the Soma growing with Kusht on Himavat. And Kusht, the local name of the Kusht grass is Kunt. Kunt, as known as by its local name in Lahore and Kullu. Now, where is ancient Kulu? According to Hun Sang, who came in the 7th century, Kulu lies west of the Bias River and north of the Bias Parvati confluence all the way to Rotangla Pass. And if you look at his description, you can actually feel that you are in Kulu. But of course, excavations haven't taken place. And this is the reason that my whole quest for understanding the epic Mahabharata here becomes very important. The part that PGW can play in understanding whether the Mahabharata actually, in some level, occurred here. The use of iron is very important. And I'll talk about the use of iron, that why I feel that this place needs to be archaeologically investigated. Now, we have socio-economic evidence in by way of numismatics, the study of coins. So you have dynasties from the 1st to the 2nd century CE. The Vrishnis, coins from the 1st century BC, talk about it as Kulut, a republic. You have 5 Mitra kings. You have the Virayash. Rulers are known only through coins. The provenance of the coins tell us about their socio-economic and religious spread. Now, an interesting thing is that these coins are not really found within the region of the region of Himachal, but they are found away. So it almost seems that internally maybe there was a barter economy and externally there was a monetary system, because these coins have been found in Pathankot, in Sirkap. So maybe the people were mercantile people engaging in trade and commerce. And it also seems that Buddhism held sway in the Kulut country, because we know that Ashoka, he kind of brought Buddhism here, and Hyun Sang even speaks of a large stupa here. which has not been excavated, we haven't found. And we find, symbols like wheel on pillar with half lion and half three ratna symbol, the dharm chakra and all. And there are a lot of Buddhist images in temples in Kulu. So they're Hindu temples, but you have Buddhist images inside those temples. And these are very ancient idols. Now, when we come to intangible cultural heritage, in Himachal, you have the playing out of Thoda, which was a ritualistic and romantic play, where the Kauravas are seen to be 60 in number, a deviation from the 100, the Shathas, and the Pandavas are 5 in number, the Pathas or Pashas. The descendants are known as the Shathas and Pashas, and every year during the Baisakhi month, the descendants get together, okay, and they have a fight with all their paraphernalia. Now, as the myth goes, that Rishi Kashyap had two wives, Krodhavas and Kasha. Okay, now Kasha is the mother, who is the mother of the mother of Kashas and of course of the descendants. So the question is, are Shathas a clan of the Kashas or the descendants of the Kauravas? In the Basak month, the ritual play commences. Yudhishthir promises he will be back during the next Chaitra, and everybody waits. And there is a verse that is sung, Panj Pandu Ailo Chaitra Mahina. It's called the Pandavayan, where they're waiting for the Pandavas to return, and they never return. So they play out this ritualistic play waiting for them to come back. And the tools they use are the farsha, axes, the ghantasa, the hatchets, dangra, the big axe, tarar, the swords, and the dhalas, the shields. A lot of iron is being used, okay? The dhanu and the shari are sharp-edged combat tools, and the bows are made out of the wooden part, which is known as the thoda, okay? So the kashas also talk about khashori chali khai puchiti di aag lai. They take their revenge even by marrying daughters to their enemy. Okay, so if they can marry their daughters to the enemy, they can even give Draupadi in for losing their everything. They put even Draupadi to that game. Polyandry. Now this is very, very interesting because Khasho Rikiya Rish Ek Man Bab Ish, which means do not envy the Khashas. They have one mother and 20 fathers. Polyandry is known to have been practiced in the Kulu Valley and in the Jaunsar region of Uttarakhand. Now, why this is important is because here in Kulu, polyandry has stopped. But Dr. Aniket Alam, when he was talking about in our own forum, he talked about the traditions of women, and polyandry was foremost amongst them. One girl was married to five brothers, four brothers, five brothers. Even today in Jaunsar, it's still followed. And with the coming of the British, orthodoxy set in. They said, oh my God, this is too liberal. This cannot be done. This is not right. And that's what stopped their kind of association with polyandry. And when we speak of Draupadi having five husbands, it almost seems, okay, there is some kind of connection here. And Jaunsar also, the story of the Pandavas is very important. That's in Uttaranchal. And Sirmaur, of course, which borders, and it was one area once upon a time till we politically divided those areas, and of course in the Kulu Valley. Kanates, older than the Kashas, are also mentioned along with the Kunindas for the 16 Mahajanapadas from the 6th century to the 2nd century CE. Now, the problem with Hyun Sang was that he was looking more at socio-religious environments rather than political boundaries. And when he talked about Kulanthapit, it is not the end of the habitable world, but the end of a similar socio-cultural lifestyle of the civilized people. So who are these civilized people? The Kalut people, country or people, not the ruling class. In medieval period, we do not have literary or numismatic sources except the Raj Tarangani, which also talks about Kulut. We also find mention of a Chola princess marrying Ranaditya to the king of Kulut. When we look at other evidences, we find at the Martan temple, there is an inscription which talks about the Pal dynasty of the 6th century BCE. Kadambari, the novel of the 7th century, also talks about a Kulut king. And then, of course, Kulu's history with the Pals, whether he was a fugitive, an invader. He settles in Jagatsuk in this area. And then Vishuddhapal comes to Nagar, where the ancient capital, second capital, and the third capital of the Kulu kings exists. And then finally to Sultanpur. Um, I'm not going to go into detail, but this is a little bit of archaeology for the region. You have forts, you have memorial stones, and you have the present king. With the coming of the Bhakti movement, you have the whole epic Ramayana being played out. Yeah. So you have Dussehra, where all the gods and goddesses congregate under the king. And this is a way of getting taxes and stuff like this. Is the erstwhile king of the Kulu region, and he's a very important entity here. During the Kullu Dussehra, he has to be present on the ground, bringing Ram's chariot with him. Now, when we talk about the epics and how they play out in material culture, we look at archetypes. So you have natural archetypes and spatial archetypes. The natural is inspiring, beauty, fear. It evokes fear, solitude, mystery. The tree, the rock, the grove, the forest, the mountains, caves, and water are the axis mundi, where communication with the other realm is possible. Cultural narratives, myths, and literature are inspired from these places. There's a representation in these places of the cultural icons we've grown up with. The presence talks about sacred landscape allowing the secular around it. The community functions around the landscape. When it comes to spatial archetypes, they are inspired from natural archetypes made through human efforts. There's a spatial organization of settlements and buildings. There are elements in building that create perception of space, volume, as experienced by the individual. It evokes experiences of monumentality, intimacy, expanse, constriction, tension, release, calm, and dynamism. Now, when we look at the human mind, and we have to remember, we are all wired very similarly all across the globe. So, when we look at spatial terms, we express it in built form. We have these binaries, hell versus heaven, collective versus individual identity. So, spatial archetypes are carriers of meaning who are negotiating relationships. And this is very important when I talk about the Mahabharata, because that collective identity here in the Kulu Valley is of the Mahabharata consciousness, the Pandavas being everywhere. Everything is associated with the Pandavas. Prime amongst them, Hidimba, and I'll talk about Hidimba in a little while. So again, temple, where are these negotiations taking place? Stella Kramrisch, who's an exponent of classical architecture, says the principle of periodic destruction and cosmogony that is reenacted in the temple's site selection plan, construction, and consecration. The temple and its plan, the Vastu Purush Mandala, becomes mimetic symbols of both cosmic form and process. The dynamic aspects represented in the formal design vocabulary and building rituals. So the temple is not only a place of worship, but it is also a socio-cultural institution, giving education, transmitting myths, stories in a public and private kind of setting, giving it form and meaning. This is the famous Hidimba Temple dedicated to Hidimba, the Rakshasni who got placed in the realm of the gods because of a supreme sacrifice where she allowed Ghatotkacha to be taken by Krishna for war. And she was promised that she will be worshipped in the valley as a goddess. Until this date, no festival is complete without the presence of Hidimba. Whether the Pandavas really came here and did what they did, whether he married Hidimba, we do not know. But the legend, the myth goes on. This is another temple in Rumsu. Now, it has associations with Hidimba because there is a particular god called Raja Ghepan, who every 3 years visits only 3 sites in the Kulu Valley. One is Hidimba, one is Rumsu, and the other is Malana. And this kind of connection is very, very intriguing to me because that speaks of the ancestry of the mythical characters that feature in the Mahabharata. Remember, I was talking about the Khashas and the Kirats and the Kanets. These places are all associated with those people. So the fact that the mythical characters are not going elsewhere but are only going here speaks volumes, because what is absent and what is present is also worth investigating. Here are close ups of the Hidimba Temple with their wonderful engravings. The temple itself is refurbished every 70 to 80 years. It was built in the 16th century. There is a tradition in Kulu Valley that wooden temples are refurbished. So, what is old for us, and we objectify things that, oh, why are they destroying the old? But the gods and the goddesses need homes, like how we need to paint walls, they need new walls as well. But they keep the past alive in the present through these engravings. So when you investigate these engravings, you see these birds, representing abundance and fertility. These are very Central Asian motifs. So when we talk about PGW culture as well, coming from Central Asia, Iran, Pakistan area, we also see some motifs creeping in. You have the camel. Are there camels here? No, they aren't. But maybe this is inspired from the Nubra Valley or the Silk Trade or some ancient routes that these people took. Here is the beautiful doorway and a lady who's always sitting there with her traditional attire. This is the open air temple of Ghatotkaч, right opposite Hidimba's temple. And if you notice, what is very interesting is the use of iron. Right. So the use of iron is very intriguing, because remember when I talked about Iron Age culture, the later Vedic period coinciding with Iron Age culture, when we think about painted graveware culture 1500 BCE, it's again the same time period. So when the folks of the plains are coming to the mountains, they're bringing iron with them. Now they're able to cut trees, there is a change, and you find a preponderance of iron. And iron becomes very important in something else that I'm investigating here, and I'll come to that. This is Tripura, the temple of Tripura Sundri, very much similar to Hidimba's temple. And one thing common in these temples is they evoke fear, they evoke suspense, mystery. And if you go to stone temples, you don't get that at all. So there is some kind of similarity between, even with the motifs and the iconography that you see in these temples, it's very similar. Uh, Creation myths. So created water, placed seed, golden egg, Brahma, Hiranyagarbha. Creation myth or sprouting of the lotus from a single pose of Vishnu lying there with Brahma coming out of his navel. Created forefathers of the human race, Prajapatis, seven great sages or the Sapt Rishi born out of mind. Now, when we look at the lists of the Saptrishis, Jamdagni, Kashyap, and Vashisht are very, very prominent in this region. They have a lot of myths associated in this region, especially Jamdagni. Jamdagni, because there's another sage here, Jamlu, who presides over Malana. And whether Jamlu and Jamdagni are the same, one and the same, we do not know. But the hold that Jamdagni has over the Kullu Valley is very interesting. He's present in 14 spots all over the Kulu Valley. Even in the village where I am in Jonga, the presiding god here, deity, is Jamdagni. And they have this air about them. And when I talk about air about them as if they're living, in the Kulu Valley, all these gods, goddesses, and sages are humanized as if they are living. And interestingly, and that is true for all of India, all the sages and all the deities and gods and goddesses, they have land, they own land as minors as an under 18. So they have a set of caretakers and all of that. It's very interesting, okay, that they're living entities. When I oftentimes pass through their, abodes, I'm told, shh, don't talk, God is sleeping. And I'm like, really, God is sleeping? Yes, they are. So that's how it plays out in the psyche of the people here. So you have Jamdagni, Kashyap, Vashisht, Manu as well. Now, these are illustrations made by John Nankiewel, who came with Penelope Shetwood in the 1960s. This is the Parasha Rishi temple. It was originally a shrine for the local Nag Devta. Now, before Vedic culture actually seeps in, these areas are worshipped. The water is worshipped, the Nagas are worshipped, and you find that interplay of the past coming out with every culture that kind of comes in contact. So you have serpent depictions in other temples as well, and in Parashar. You have the legend of Adi Brahma, Diyari Thakur, and Parasha Rishi. And this is very interesting again, that how there's myth upon myth. So Parasha Rishi, as you know, is associated with Vashisht and is associated with Ved Vyas. So Vyas was the son of Parasha Rishi. And what happens is that Parashar was in love with Diyari Thakur's sister. Now, geographically, if you see these spaces, you have on one hill the Adi Brahma temple of Kokhan. The opposite hill has the temple of Diyar, which is Narayan Vishnu's temple. And then in the valley, you have Bajora, Shiva's temple. Now they say that Adi Brahma, so Parashar Rishi actually fell in love with Diyari Thakur, sister. But Brahma also fell in love with the same sister, and there was a conflict. Okay, and finally, she ran away because she was so confused. She married one, but she ran away, and she touched a corpse, and she became, so as to say, impure. And that's the reason that Parashar Rishi doesn't allow women to come into his temple. Now, when we look at these myths, it's very interesting. If we do not take them literally, it talks about conflict between two societies at war, at loggerheads. Yeah, the tribes with the mainstream Brahmanical religion. There is Sanskritization. There is this conflict of the local deities with the mainstream deities. You see the Gan Devtas and the Van Devtas. You know, you see all of this happening in the way the myths are told. And here, when Parashar Rishi is actually taken out on his palanquin, he's taken out with Sheshnag, because the temple at Parashar was dedicated to the Naga cult. And in order to appease the Nagas, Parashar always has to come out with the Nagas. So there's another myth out of that again. So this is the Naga. Sisters. Why does shamanism occurs along only in wooden temples? So shamanism is a Western concept. Here you have everything speaks of a world of iron. Why is that? Why is it not used in the stone? Giving blessings, so they come out and they go. If they're upset with their own people, they say, you know what, I'm going to the cousin right opposite the hill. So they have some kind of relationship, and that relationship is based on a certain myth, and that myth figures in the epics. So you see humanization of deities with myths and rituals. You have shamanism in the Kulu Valley. You have territoriality and localization of the deities. And what you need to understand the epics and their context is a methodology which understands the past through the present using both qualitative and quantitative methods. So humanization of deities. This is the palanquins, the rathas, as I was talking about. This is a recent thing because before the 1900s, they had something called the kardu. They had a basket where they would carry the god. But now a lot of people partake in all of this. They carry the vehicles of the god. And when there is some energy that goes in, and I've witnessed it, and I'm no one to say whether it's true, it's false, or it's out of the realm, but as a viewer I see that these things are bestowed with energy, and they kind of move and they direct the people in the procession. So here they are. This is another festival, and you can see the iron dharaj, it's called, with the incense, a close up. A set of metallurgists who actually are dedicated to make the mohoras or the trumpets. Not everybody can make, they have a tradition in their families. The nagaras. And I want to show this short video of how, for example, Parasha Rishi is greeting another deity in the area of Shuru, which is dedicated to a goddess Shuru. So I'll just play this. Okay, it's not playing. I'll send it to Dr. Gitesh. Okay. So shamanism in the Kulu Valley. This is a shaman with long hair. Um, this person is an engineer, but he's been chosen as a shaman by the god. So they wear this traditional attire, which is a cloak, a white, and they do the char kind of dham, a mini version of it within their village. So why they do it, what is the sequence, is very interesting. So we are doing GPS tracking and making their route maps, where they go, why they go, in what season they go. So we are trying to digitize all of this to really understand the core of the myths that are played out, and in what context they are played out, and whether they occur in the epics or not. So this is another thing. So these are Brahmanical priests, and these are the shamanistic priests. And again, with the shamans, there is no issue of caste. Anybody can become the oracle, the spokesperson. But the Brahmins decide who's going to come to the sanctum sanctorum of the temple or not. So if you're a low class shaman, you cannot enter the sanctum sanctorum. But if you're a high class shaman, you can. But anybody can be the shaman. And the kind of rituals the shamans have, even when they become shamans, they go through a period of apprenticeship. They have to showcase their superhuman powers, which also involves drinking blood of a freshly slaughtered goat or sheep. They're also buried, and they are then ritualistically plowed over, and then they're released to see whether they're still alive or not. Um, Children are repositories of culture as well. Transmission happens because we tell stories to them. So in one of the village kids made this little palanquin of the gods, and I asked them about it. So I was very happy that the traditions are not really dying, they're still playing with them. So iron again, the ghondis, the dhangiyaras, the lohas, the kataras, the shanghals. Some of these elements are also used at that thoda ritual. Yeah, the Malega Ghur is the main shaman, and the Deokhel is the dance of the shamans, which has the mudras, the way they move is all very very interesting. Localization of the deities. So you have officials of the devtas called the karkuns, the kardar, pujari, bhandari. Gur is the mouthpiece. A gur in the making is batar. There's a granary keeper, an accountant, a palanquin bearer, a musician, drummers, carriers. It's like they have their own kingdom. And all these characters also occur in the Mahabharata, in the myths, everything. The set of officials that I just talked about, he's a lawyer, but he's also a Kardar of the temple of Jamdagni, the Rishi who occurs in our myths. This is the granary keeper, and this is the person who is the Gur. And he was selected Gur after a period of 80 years. So it's not like a Gur is always there. The god has to select, the deity has to select the Gur. So the methodology is ethnography, talking about oral stories, talking to people around it, stories that they've grown up with, their forefathers and have ancestors have kind of passed on that information, which is not documented. So the whole idea of the institute is kind of documenting all this intangible cultural heritage. Here is a gur who is from the low caste, and he told me about these gauri rituals that he also had to undergo to kind of become a gur. And gurs are not hereditary, so sometimes they are, but most of the time they aren't. This is another village head who's also a kardar, caretaker of the temple here. This is also another spot of Jamdagni. So you have kind of two spots, right? So he's telling me stories, and I'm like looking away and laughing. Um, Again, when you look at myths, you have to analyze them and try to understand their true meaning. I'm not going to go through the text because everybody knows who Brahma is. And this whole interplay of, what is the myth trying to say? Are they pro woman, for example? That's an example. Or against women? Like the laws of Manu, very, very against women. Why? Does it speak of society during that period? Shiva, in the Bhagavatam, Shiva tells Sati and worships Krishna, which is revealed in pure consciousness and is subordinate to Vishnu. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjun says, "My dear Lord Krishna, I see assembled together in your universal body all the demigods and other living entities. I see Brahma sitting on the lotus flower, as well as Shiva and many sages and divine serpents." There's this continuous the buffalo a tryst with Brahmanical and non-Brahmanical people, Uma, Kali, Ambika, and Durg. Indigenous deities are commingling with the classical Hindu deities now. So, are they role models? Do they speak of patriarchal values? Radha on one hand, Kali on the other. Kathleen Arnold says to rescue Shakti from its patriarchal prison, in which women, because of their power, need to be subdued. Here, I'm sitting with the locals in a village called Kasheri, and on top of the village there is this site. And I asked them who made that. They said the Pandavas made them. And then I went to Google Earth and I saw that it's actually remnants of a tower. On the slope of the mountain that I'm on, there's another watchtower, and I have applied for permission with the Archaeological Survey of India to survey all the mountain tops here and to really understand whether the Pandavas made it or not. Well, it's very evident they did not, but the story moves on that everybody talks about the Pandavas in every aspect of their lives. Here we found this little tank in Kasheri, and when I asked the person who kind of by chance excavated it because he was renovating his house, he said, "Oh, this was built by the Pandavas." And I said, "What are you going to do about it?" So he said, "I'm going to ask the Devta." And so archaeological survey is not involved in this excavation. And I was like, oh my god, there goes another piece of information in history. And these are places where customary law really plays a very important role. And he said that I will let you know what the devta says. So then he calls me through 3 weeks later and he says, we have resurrected the same tank in the village square. I said, so what did the devta say? He says, do not destroy it, but displace it. So I was like, thank God the devta at least speaks of preserving it. Though we lost the context from its original provenance, but at least it figures, it is still important. And here I'm trying to find perhaps PGW pottery, but I was just trying to take chances because there's no excavation that has been done in this region. And I feel if we do that, I am sure that we will find traces of painted graveware culture here, which can connect it to the story of the Mahabharata. So again, ethnography has two perspectives, etic and emic, the outside view and the insider's view. And somewhere together we get to know the truth. Through observation, through documentation, through qualitative and quantitative data using statistics, myth assessments and compilation, intangible cultural heritage through anthropological approaches, and tangible cultural heritage through archaeological sources is the need of the hour to understand the Mahabharata from an anthropological and archaeological perspective. And this is where it's happening at the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies. This classroom is right above me. And that's it. That's the view of the valley from the third capital of the Kulu kings. And I welcome you all here whenever you want to come. And like I said, I am not an authority on the Mahabharata, but it does figure in my realm of things. And I feel it is my duty to kind of gather all this information which is associated with the epics. It is a work in progress. And as we kind of move on, I will try to kind of share more information as it comes my way. And I hope this has been relevant to what your forum is all about. And thank you so much for having me speak on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Bala, for handing it over to me. Thank you, Dr. Sonali. I think Dr. Sonali's words today spoke volumes of her archaeological expertise, and she simplified her technical understanding for many of us who are not from the same discipline. So beginning from excavations, starting from Purana Killa at New Delhi, she made us travel through Kurukshetra while giving glimpses of the temples, customs, and legends in Kulu Valley associated with Mahabharata and epic characters. Now, this debate of myth and reality, no doubt it seems unending, but it really fascinates the academic mind. And we, the enthusiasts of Mahabharata, are always keen to learn quite a lot more about Mahabharata, even through the myths in mountains, the living culture, and as Dr. Bala says, the culture that is lived. Personally, I am associated with trekking in Himalayas. So I always say, as trekkers in Himalayan spaces, we do come across epics in mountains more and more than any other region. Now, this element is something that can only be experienced more and more by being there, by exploring those places, not just by reading through the books. We wish and hope that Kulu Valley gets more and more explored from the perspective of the epic Mahabharata. And thank you, Dr. Sonali, for sharing such interesting slides that could actually be used quite a lot by our students and scholars here who are from the Department of History too, and are regular participants in this series of webinars. So on behalf of Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, and Kamla Nehru College, University of Delhi, Dr. Bala, and the whole Spark project team, I thank Dr. Sonali Gupta for sparing time for all of us today. And thank you, participants, for being there with us for today's session.